Welcome to HardScript.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. I came home one evening to find my wife sitting on the far end of the couch, arms crossed, eyes fixed on her phone, a Starbucks cup sweating on the coffee table. She didn't even look up when I walked in. 3 years ago, she'd wait by the door when I got home from the firm, asking about projects, laughing at my sketches. Now, she flinched when I sat beside her. I said nothing, just watched the light from her phone dance across her face until she quietly stood and moved to another chair. No words, just distance. That was the night I realized she'd already left. She just hadn't packed yet. My name is Ethan Cole, 41, architect. I design spaces meant to hold people together, families, teams, lives. But nothing in my plans accounted for the silence that moved into my own home. My wife, Laura, is a real estate attorney, sharp, composed, allergic to chaos. She's always believed every problem has a clause, a paragraph, a rule. And maybe she was right. Maybe the rules changed, and I missed the memo. Across the street lives David, widower, realtor, easy smile, easy voice. The kind of man who asks if your trash bins need pulling in or if your lawn service is doing a good job. Laura started helping him with some contracts, she said, pro bono, just neighborly. I didn't question it. Architects don't deal in gossip. We deal in lines, angles, silence. But then I noticed she always had her laptop open when his name popped up on her phone. Always laughing quietly at something I couldn't hear. Always leaving for walks that ended at his porch. At first, I told myself it was harmless. People need friends. Grief can make men lonely. But then I saw her reflection in our window one night, sitting too close to him on his steps, sharing that kind of half-smile you reserve for secrets. I didn't confront her, just noted the shape of the moment, the way I would study a crack in a foundation. Because cracks only widen. The next morning, while she was getting ready, I opened Zillow. Typed in one word, distance. Houses appeared like lifeboats. By the time her car backed out of the driveway, I already had a list saved. Quiet streets, open fields, space. The very thing she said she needed. And I decided then, I'd give it to her completely. I didn't ask questions after that night. I just started taking measurements in silence. Every architect knows that endings have structure too. You just have to trace the fault lines before the collapse. Laura left for work early every morning, Starbucks in hand, scrolling through her phone before she even reached the car. I stayed home longer, pretending to review blueprints, but really I was studying our house. What would stay, what would leave, what she'd notice missing, and what she wouldn't. Our living room felt like a showroom from crate and barrel. Everything perfectly arranged, emotionally sterile. I realized she'd built this space for appearances, not for living. A week later, I drove to Home Depot on a Saturday morning, told the clerk I needed moving boxes. He asked how big the project was. I said, about 13 years worth. He smiled like it was a joke. It wasn't. I bought locks too, one for my new studio, one for the storage unit where I started keeping my personal files. At night, while Laura worked on her cases, I quietly backed up every architectural design I'd ever done. She noticed none of it. Her attention lived somewhere across the street. David waved one afternoon while mowing his lawn. Laura was standing beside him, laughing about something on his phone. She looked freer than I'd seen her in months. Maybe that was what she needed. Someone simpler, someone who didn't spend hours sketching lines that never moved. I watched through the window until they disappeared into his backyard. I thought about walking over, about saying something sharp, something final. But that wasn't my language. My language was precision, space, design. That night, I logged back into Zillow. I found a house outside of town, a minimalist 2-story with glass walls and open land all around. It wasn't escape, it was clarity. I didn't make an offer yet, just saved it quietly, like a blueprint for a future that no longer included her. She once told me, during one of our colder arguments, that I didn't know how to give people space. Maybe she was right. But if space was what she wanted, I was finally learning how to design it perfectly. The change came slowly, like light fading in a long hallway. Laura started staying later at the office, saying her clients were impossible, her deadlines insane. I believed her at first. Then I noticed the rhythm of her absences matched his schedule. The porch light across the street stayed on later whenever she was working late. Sometimes, through the window, I'd see the faint outline of her talking with him in his driveway, her arms folded, head tilted the way she did when she listened intently. That same posture she used to have with me, back when I was still worth hearing. I didn't ask. I observed. Every detail became data, every silence a clue. Architects are trained to see what isn't said, the air between walls, the tension between form and emptiness. I started cataloging those absences the way I track dimensions on a blueprint. I made sure the utilities were in my name alone. I updated my professional accounts. Quiet, careful moves that meant nothing on their own, but together formed the skeleton of departure. On a Thursday night, she mentioned wanting some time to breathe. She said it like she was negotiating a lease, clinical and rehearsed. I nodded, said I understood. The truth was, I'd already begun designing the exit she was asking for. She poured herself a glass of wine and went upstairs without another word. I sat in the dark, scrolling through Zillow again, comparing square footage and acreage like they were equations for peace. That weekend, I visited the property I'd been eyeing. 30 minutes outside the city, down a quiet road lined with oak trees. No neighbors in sight, no shared fences, no porch lights facing mine. Just air and distance. I stood there for a long time, listening to the wind. It was the first sound that didn't hurt. Back home, she was on the phone, laughing softly. I didn't need to ask who it was. Her laughter wasn't mine anymore. I opened my laptop and placed an offer on the house. Cash. Fast close. I didn't even flinch when I clicked send. The design was finished now. All that was left was construction. The offer was accepted within 24 hours. A simple email with digital signatures, closing date, and one short line from the agent. Congratulations on your new beginning. I stared at those words for a long time, realizing they sounded like both a welcome and an obituary. I didn't tell Laura. There was nothing to tell. Our conversations had become transactions. Short, factual, bloodless. She asked if I'd seen her charger, if the plumber had called, if I could move my sketches off the dining table. Not once did she ask how I was. Not once did she look me in the eye. I started packing at night. One room at a time. Quiet, deliberate. I ordered file boxes and padded envelopes from Amazon, labeling each by project name. My studio emptied like a lung exhaling for the first time in years. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did and didn't care. Either way, the silence held. The only sound was her phone vibrating after midnight. She'd smile faintly, thumb scrolling fast. One morning, I drove to Home Depot again, bought paint samples. Not for this house, but for the new one. I didn't plan to take much with me, just my drafting table, a few tools, and the chair she always said looked too industrial. The rest, she could keep. Crate and barrel furniture, the curated art prints she chose, the rugs I never liked. I'd leave it all exactly how she wanted. Perfect, untouched, like a museum exhibit of our former life. When she mentioned needing space again, I just nodded. Her voice carried a strange relief, like she was finally speaking her truth. I didn't fight it. Fighting implies care. I'd already moved past that. That night, I sat outside, watching the house across the street. The porch light flicked on, and David stepped out with 2 mugs of coffee. She joined him a moment later, barefoot, laughing softly. The sound traveled across the quiet street, filling the gaps our marriage had left behind. I finished my drink, went inside, and opened my email. I confirmed the closing date and wired the down payment. She wanted space. I was building it for her, one transaction at a time. Closing day came faster than I expected. I signed the papers from my office, the notary arriving exactly on time, efficient and polite. She slid the final page across the desk and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Cole." I nodded, though it didn't feel like congratulations. It felt like a demolition permit. When she left, I sat there a while, staring at the deed with my name alone on it. The house was mine. The distance was mine. At home, Laura was in the kitchen, typing something on her laptop, her phone face down beside it. She barely looked up when I walked in. She asked if I could pick up takeout on my way back from wherever I go during the day now. Her tone wasn't cruel, just detached, like she was talking to a neighbor. I said I'd handle it. She thanked me without looking up. That word, thanks, felt like the last nail sealing the coffin of our marriage. I started spending evenings at the new house. No furniture yet, just the echo of footsteps on clean wood floors. I'd bring coffee from Starbucks, set it on the counter, and sketch ideas for the renovation. Nothing dramatic, just open space, simple lines, clean air. I wanted a place without her scent, without her laughter buried in the walls. Back at the old house, her patterns were predictable now. She'd come home later, dressed a little differently, smiling faintly when she thought I wasn't watching. Once, I saw her standing at the window, looking across the street. The porch light came on, and he stepped out. She waved, small and careful, like a secret signal. I didn't interrupt. I just took another quiet measurement in my head. That weekend, I packed the last of my things. Documents, laptop, personal tools. Everything else stayed exactly where it was. I printed the final paperwork, placed it in a neat stack on her desk, along with a notarized folder. On top, I left a short note, handwritten. 5 words only. You needed space. You'll have plenty. Then I set the keys beside it and walked out. No confrontation. No sound. Just the quiet closing of a door that would never open again. When I drove away that morning, there was no soundtrack, no cinematic farewell, just the muted hum of my Volvo and the sound of gravel under the tires. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. The house, the street, the life behind me had already become part of another layout, a project I'd finished and filed away. I reached the new house by noon. It stood alone, surrounded by open fields, its silence almost physical. Inside, sunlight poured through the glass walls, touching nothing but dust. It felt raw, unfinished, honest. That night, I sat on the floor with a sandwich and my laptop, reviewing emails. One from the moving company confirming delivery, another from the utility service acknowledging the transfer. Clean transitions. No loose ends. I logged into Amazon, ordered new linens, plates, and a single set of silverware. Nothing duplicated. Nothing left for someone else. This house would have no echoes. A few days later, her message appeared. Just one line. You left? I didn't reply. Hours passed before another followed. Is this about him? Still nothing. I wasn't playing games. I simply didn't see the point. Silence has weight. It says everything words dilute. By the end of the week, she called from a number I didn't recognize. I watched it ring, then fade. She left a voicemail, steady voice, professional tone. She said she wanted to talk about next steps and logistics. She used legal words, the ones she knew I'd recognize but wouldn't respond to. I deleted it. The next morning, I drove back to town, parked across the street for the last time. Her car was gone. His wasn't. The blinds in our old living room were half closed, but I could still see the outline of new furniture. Her taste, not mine. Crate and barrel, probably. I stayed there for maybe a minute, just long enough to confirm what I already knew. She'd filled the space I left, quickly and efficiently, as she did with everything. I didn't feel anger. Not regret either. Just the calm that comes when a design is complete. The house she kept was her world now. The distance I built was mine. And finally, the silence between them was exactly the right size. The first few weeks alone were quiet in a way that felt almost engineered. I woke before sunrise, brewed coffee, and sat by the wide windows watching fog lift off the fields. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It had rhythm, shape. I started sketching again, not for clients, just for myself. Buildings with long corridors, open courtyards, and walls that never touched. Designs built entirely on distance. Maybe that was all I'd ever been doing, drawing blueprints for separation. One evening, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address, just my name in her handwriting. Inside were 2 lines on plain stationery. You got what you wanted. I hope it's enough. I folded the note once, slid it into a drawer, and didn't respond. The irony made me almost smile. She still thought this was about wanting something. It wasn't. It was about ending the noise. I drove into town once a week for groceries and supplies, stopping by Home Depot for tools, sometimes Starbucks for a black coffee. It was strange being invisible in a place where no one knew my story. At first, I caught myself checking my phone out of habit, expecting some new message, a demand for explanation. But there was nothing. She'd stopped trying. The silence had reached her, too. One Saturday, I saw David by chance. He was at the hardware store, picking out light fixtures. He didn't see me. He looked tired, older than I remembered, like the glow that once surrounded him had dimmed. Maybe grief had caught up with him again. Or maybe he'd realized she wasn't the cure for it. I didn't stay long enough to find out. Back home, I opened my laptop and reviewed a new project proposal, a community center built around open space, natural light, reflection pools. The concept was simple: create room for people to breathe. As I adjusted the layout, I realized I'd finally done the same for myself. I hadn't run away. I'd redesigned my life, not to escape her, but to reclaim what she'd mistaken for emptiness. Space wasn't absence. It was freedom measured in quiet. Autumn came fast that year. The fields around the new house turned gold, and mornings carried the sharp chill of something ending. I spent more time outside, clearing the yard, sketching ideas for a small studio on the property. Every sound, the wind through dry grass, the crunch of gravel under my shoes, reminded me that silence could have texture. It no longer felt empty. It felt earned. One afternoon, while checking mail at the gate, I saw her car parked on the road. The same silver sedan she'd driven for years. She didn't get out, just sat there, engine idling, staring at the house from a distance. I stood still, halfway down the drive. Part of me expected her to roll down the window, wave, say something human. She didn't. After a few minutes, she turned around and drove off. No message followed. I didn't need one. That brief visit said everything. She'd come to see if I'd built what she asked for. And I had. That night, I made dinner for one and poured a single glass of wine. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I thought about her living across the street from him, maybe still convincing herself it was nothing serious, just connection. But emotional gravity doesn't lie. It always pulls until something breaks. Maybe she'd learned that now. Maybe she hadn't. Either way, it wasn't my concern anymore. Later, I received a voicemail from a mutual friend. Laura had listed our old house for sale. The listing photos were immaculate: bright kitchen, clean angles, minimalist furniture, all of it still bearing my design. The irony was perfect. She was selling the last space we built together, the one she thought she'd won. The caption on Zillow read, "Open, airy, full of light." I almost laughed. I closed my laptop and stepped outside. The night was silent, the sky clear. My car sat in the driveway, cold metal reflecting starlight. I realized I hadn't driven past that neighborhood once since she left. And I wouldn't. Some spaces don't need revisiting. Some structures stand only to remind you why you stopped building them. Winter came quietly. Snow softened the outlines of everything. The driveway, the fences, even the scars in the ground where I'd planned to build the studio. The silence deepened, like the world itself had paused to listen. I woke early each morning, made coffee, and watched light creep across the fields. Routine had replaced reflection. I didn't need to think about her anymore. I'd already built a life where her absence was part of the design, not the flaw. One morning, a letter arrived forwarded from my old address. Legal envelope. Her handwriting. I left it on the counter for hours before opening it. Inside was a short message. "I sold the house. Thought you should know. It's over now." No signature. Just that. I folded it once, placed it in the same drawer as her earlier note, and shut it gently. Closure doesn't come from words. It comes from silence that no longer hurts. The next week, I drove into town for supplies. On the way, I passed a for sale sign on the side of the road, David's real estate company. It took me a moment to register. His house was on the market too. Maybe he was moving on. Maybe she'd already done the same. The story I'd once lived inside was now just a listing on a lawn. And that realization didn't sting. It felt like distance working exactly as intended. Back home, I spent the afternoon sanding wood panels for the new studio. I liked the sound, the quiet rasp of effort, steady and certain. Work has always been my form of prayer. Around dusk, I brewed another cup of coffee and stood outside. From here, I could see miles of open land, unbroken horizon, sky bleeding orange into blue. I'd created something she never could, a life that didn't depend on anyone staying. When night fell, I turned off every light in the house and listened. No traffic, no voices, no unresolved questions. Just space, the kind she'd said she wanted and the kind I'd finally understood. She'd reached for freedom. I'd built it. Only, it wasn't hers anymore. It was mine. Spring arrived like a slow thaw. The fields turned green again, and for the first time in years, I caught myself breathing without thinking about it. The studio was finished by then, just a single room with wide windows, clean lines, and an oak desk I'd built myself. I'd kept it empty on purpose. Space. I'd learned, didn't need filling to feel alive. It just needed honesty. One morning, while sketching, I saw a car pull up by the gate. It wasn't hers. A delivery van. The driver handed me a small package, no sender listed. Inside was a photo, our old house, taken from across the street, with a short note clipped to the back. It's yours again. I couldn't stay there. No apology, no explanation. Just transfer, like property changing hands. I looked at the photo for a long time, then set it down beside my coffee. Some structures don't need rebuilding. Some should remain ruins. That afternoon, I drove into town, stopped at Starbucks for a black coffee, and watched people pass by the windows. Ordinary lives, full of noise and small chaos. I didn't envy them. I'd had that once. The constant negotiation between love and resentment, presence and absence. What I had now was clarity. Driving back, I thought about what she'd said the last night we shared that house. You make everything about distance. Maybe she was right. But distance is what kept things standing. Every bridge, every building, every relationship needs tension to hold its shape. We just forgot how much. At sunset, I parked the car and stood by the porch. The horizon stretched out, wide and silent, a line I could finally trace without hesitation. I didn't go back for the house or the memories inside it. I didn't need to. She'd wanted space, and I'd given her more than she could ever cross. That night, I walked through my quiet rooms, lights low, windows open to the cool air. I thought about the design of it all, the precision, the calm, the way silence can speak when words are finished. And as I turned off the last light, I understood. Sometimes, the cleanest structure is the one built after everything else collapses. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.